Hi, everybody, and welcome to a Positive Thought Reminder. I wanted to talk a little bit about what everybody's been talking about, and that is the unfortunate passing away, murder, death of George Floyd. And it got me thinking that as a person of color who is not from the Black community, what is my role in all of this? How do I understand what is happening given the context of the society that we find ourselves living in? And I really got thinking that I have no idea how to move forward. And I feel like many of us might be feeling like that. We want to empathize with the indiscriminate discrimination that happens and the marginalization that people of color, and in particular the Black community, experience. But how do we tackle it, and where do we start? And one of the things that I thought of was the sensationalization and the brutalization of the way in which George Floyd was murdered by the same people who are designed to protect society is a microcosm, is a consequence of something much more deeper. So we can be outraged at his death, and we demand justice for his death. But how much are we willing to change the society in which we live that allows for things like that to take place over and over and over again? And the more I got realizing that this is not an isolated incident. This exists within the context of systemic discrimination, of over-policing, of racial profiling, of marginalizing people and not be willing to hear their voices. Instead, putting your narrative and your lens and describing their lives as such. I just want to give you an example. If you truly want to make change, if I truly want to make change, then we have to recognize the unconscious bias that exists in all of us. We have to recognize how people of color, and in particular, those of the Black community, how much they're overrepresented in poverty. All you have to do is go drive by a low-income neighborhood. Look at the faces. Look at the skin color. Compare that to a much more affluent neighborhood and look at the faces and look at the skin color. You are going to have your answer right there. But I wonder, for many of us, how outraged are we when we see those things? How much are we protesting in the streets when we see that overt discrimination and systemic marginalization? How up in arms are we when we see those things? So, to further contextualize this, a person who lives in a low-income neighborhood, think of them as young people. Think of a youth who lives in a low-income neighborhood. Think about the choices that that person has in that community. Compare that same choice to that of a youth who lives in an affluent neighborhood. Somebody who has access to resources, lives in safety and security. You know what their choices are in the summer? Whether they want to attend band camp or a lacrosse camp. You know what the choices are and what the choices might be for somebody who doesn't have access to the same amount of resources and who lives in much more precarious situations? Whether they're going to find a summer job at a warehouse, at a convenience store, at a fast food or a grocery store, or if they're going to be involved in something much more precarious. Things like the counterculture, things like selling drugs or stealing, theft of vehicles, just doing something. If those are the choices that the youth has, then think about who they're going to come in contact with. And hold yourself accountable as a society of the choices that we allow to be limited to people who don't have the resources as everybody else. We need to hold young people, we need to hold every individual accountable for the decisions they make. But at the same time, we need to hold ourselves accountable as a society that when we allow people who have so much potential, regardless of their skin color, to not have the choices that helps them achieve their potential, then we have done something wrong. And overtly and continuously and through facts, we know that people of color and the Black community are overrepresented in poverty, in contact with the criminal justice system. So then the lens in which you see them, the lens with which the police sees them, are not taken into consideration of the barriers that they've had to overcome and the barriers that they continue to live with on a day-to-day basis. So my reflection on the tragic passing away of George Floyd is that this represents so much more. And we have to look within to make any type of change, any kind of lasting change. We need to empathize not just with this scenario, but with the greater collection of experiences that people experience. And let me just ask you, if your attention is more in terms of how people are representing and externalizing their anger, whether that's in protest or in lootings, if that is where your attention is at, then you've already dropped the ball. Think about it. Somebody passed away that didn't need to, that didn't do anything wrong. And if your lens, if your privileged lens can't even comprehend that, then that is the problem in the society we face today.